And now I'm extremely happy to welcome Francois Dupuy. You should wait after the lecture, so because you never know, maybe you will regret to have applauded before. Ah, that was the applause for SNCF. Thanks to Francois Dupuy. Francois Dupuy has been teaching in our MBA some years ago. And thanks to his lecture, most of us changed our minds about SNCF, the French National Railway Company, because he explained to us the stakeholder approach in change management. And he showed us how, in fact, people in the train, when there were delays in the train, could not know about those delays, and this is why all of us being in the train couldn't get an exhaustive information about what was happening and how long would the delay be and so on. And he explained to us why what was happening, and then since then, every time I take my TGV, I go to the how do you say that? To the conductor, and I tell him, thank you, I know you are doing your best. And they are very happy, yeah. So Francois Dupuy, sociologist, he will introduce himself, is someone who I usually say to my students and to the companies I consult with, read his books, and you will understand a lot about complexity and about what does change management, and also indirectly lean management. To me, listening to you, Kayetan, when I'm teaching the Kotter model, to me, the empowerment part of the Kotter model is where lean management comes in. So now I see where I can put that in. Thank you, François, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carolina, for this very nice introduction. And first, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back here, by the way, because it was very nice when I was teaching for your MBA students. So you asked me to make a short introduction. It's always a little bit boring talking about yourself, but anyway. So my name is Francois Dupuy, I'm French, and as you said, by the way, I'm a sociologist, which is going to explain what I'm going to talk about with you. I started my career in a huge French bureaucracy, which is called CNRS, which is, if I would have to translate in English, is a kind of National Center for Scientific Research. And I spent 15 years here working with one of the best French sociologists, whose name is Michel Crozier. And yes, I'm a pure Crozier man, okay? Because I see some people, they heard about Michel Crozier. And at that time, I specialized during 15 years in studying the French public administration. But you could spend your life on the French public administration. If you're a sociologist, it's a never-ending story. And if you're a consultant, it's a golden mine. Okay? So, and then I have been teaching, and I'm still teaching a lot, by the way, mostly on the INSEAD campus. And I spent 5 years teaching in the United States for 2 different universities. And I'm consulting a lot as well. This is the reason I can write books, because books are made with what I'm studying for the different corporations I'm working for. And my current position is to be academic director for the European Center for Executive Development, which is a unit on the INSEAD campus, which means that I'm working in Fontainebleau. Okay, I guess this is enough for the personal introduction. Now, what I would like to do, I thought about the topic I'm supposed to talk about, which is the unavoidable change. And just to make it as interesting as possible for you, I would like to develop something which is not very politically correct. Okay, so, which means that not only I'm going to talk about the unavoidable change, but I would like to show you that it's a double unavoidable change, which means that we have to make a first change in our organizations, and then because of this first change, we have to start another one which is overlapping with the first one, okay? And doing so, I'm going to try to describe what happens in the field of management now for something which is around 40 years. And I have to say, I'm just talking about developed countries, management in developed countries, because if I would have to talk about emerging countries, the question of management would be different. And that's something we forget very often. Okay, we are very Western-centric, if I may say. So I repeat, what I'm talking about is about developed countries. The point I would like to start with is to tell you that finally now for 40 years, I say 40 years because I think that the mechanism I'm going to try to describe is starting with the first oil shock around 1974. And then with the delays, if I may say, the revolution I'm going to talk about is starting in the early 80s, which means that it's in between 30 and 40 years. And for 40 years, 30 years now, we are facing a true revolution in our organizations. And if there is a revolution in our organizations, by definition, there is a revolution in management as well. Okay, because how could it be possible to have something happening in organizations and nothing in management? To make sure that we understand each other, there is a first point I would like to clarify. Look, I'm talking about an organizational revolution, but I need first briefly to give a definition of organization. Otherwise, we won't understand what we are talking about, which means that when we talk about organization, upheaval in organization, revolution in organizations, what are we talking about? What is an organization? If I'm raising this question, it is because as far as I know, all of us, including you and me, we are repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly making the same confusion, the same mistake, which is a confusion between organization and structure. As soon as we talk about organizations, we have coming in mind the official chart, the departments, divisions, business units, support functions, etc., plus some basic rules, procedures, processes that are supposed to explain how the structure is supposed to operate. And doing so, we are making a mistake. And I want to show you the consequences of this mistake, because I guess all of you in this room, you know that it's impossible to reduce an organization to a structure or a set of rules, processes, and procedures, etc. Or, to be more provocative, I could say, I hope that in this room, nobody is naive enough to think that organizations are working according to their rules. I guess so. Okay, so I love this statement because people look at me and I see in your eyes, am I supposed to agree or not? Because if I agree, I'm not very politically correct. Guess what? To be more provocative, I would tell you not only organizations are not working according to their structures, their rules, their procedures, but hopefully for them, if they would try to do so, they would be stuck. Think about something. How do you call in English, but in French or in Spanish, it's the same. This kind of situation when in any organization you have a group of people that are not very happy. They want to get something, they want to obtain something. And in order to get what they want to get, they try to put the maximum pressure on their management. And to put the maximum pressure on their management, they suddenly decide to strictly use all rules, procedures, processes they are supposed to use. What did you say? Maybe you said it in French. What did you say in French? Grève du zèle. How do you say grève du zèle in English? Okay, at least you're going to learn some English. Okay, so, which is a byproduct of this presentation. I'm asking the question not to make you laughing, because the English phrase is far better than the French one. In English, you call that working to rule. Or in American English, you're going to call that working by the book, which is almost the same, okay? But it's funny because you go to somebody and you say, what do you do today? I'm just working to rule. It means that I'm on strike. Okay, it's one of the most beautiful paradoxes in management, okay? Which means that, and it's funny because what I say now, everybody knows. Everybody knows. But it doesn't prevent people in our organization to produce every day more rules, more processes, more procedures, more reporting systems, etc. But they cross their fingers. They hope that people are going to be smart enough not to use them. Because as soon as people decide to use them, it means that they are on strike. And you know basically what it means? It means that in our organizations, most of the rules and processes and so on are not issued to solve problems. They are issued to cover people issuing those rules, which is completely different, okay? So, and as a result of that, it means that behind structures and procedures, you have a reality, what I'm used to call the real reality. If you think about it in simple terms, you understand that this reality is made with the way people are working, the way people are deciding, the way people are solving their problems, what we call in sociology the functioning modes. And when I'm talking about organizations, I'm talking about that. I'm not talking about structures. I'm talking about what people are doing. Organization means what people are doing if you want to be very practical. And by the way, if you follow me, even if it is not really my topic, but let me mention this point, you understand right away why what we call change management is so difficult. Because if an organization would be no more than a structure, changing an organization would be changing the structure. Nobody cares, except top managers, because they are afraid to lose some ground, some territory, etc., etc. But if you understand that organization means what people are doing, as a result of that, changing an organization means changing what people are doing. And no need to spend too long. All of you understand that changing what people are doing is awfully much more difficult than just changing structures. This is the reason why change management is so difficult. And when I'm talking about an organizational revolution, I'm talking about a revolution in the way people are working. It's a revolution of working I'm talking about, okay? So let me briefly as possible, explain to you why we are facing this kind of revolution now for 40, 30 years. It depends on your business, finally, okay? So this revolution is not happening at the same time, whatever the business. Basically, this revolution is related to what I'm used to call the customer's victory. And I need to explain to you what it means, a customer's victory, because sometimes people are mistaking. You were talking about the French SNCF, for example. In the French SNCF, French Railways, they discovered very recently that they have customers, which has been a big trauma for the organization. And as soon as they discovered that they were having customers, they decided to take people-facing customers, only people-facing customers, which means 30,000 out of 170,000 people, which means 140,000 people, it doesn't matter. They took these 30,000 people and they started to train them to what they called service attitudes, which means to say, hello, may I see your ticket, please? Okay, so, which means smiling as a competitive advantage. It's a naive perception of the customer's victory. To give you a more accurate illustration, let me take a brief example. When I introduced myself, I told you that I'm working in Fontainebleau. Fontainebleau is a small city. It's about 60 kilometers south from Paris, and Fontainebleau is having 20,000 inhabitants, which is not a big city. Suppose instead of having this meeting today in Aix, you have it in Fontainebleau, and suppose that instead of being in 2012, we are in 1974. Which means, roughly speaking, in between 30 and 40 years ago. And suppose you want to buy a car. Let's try to think about something. At that time, Fontainebleau was already having 20,000 people. How many car dealerships were you having in Fontainebleau 40 years ago? Let me give you the answer, a single one. And because we are in France, by definition, it was a Renault. Excellent, it was a Renault. Plus, it was a Renault subsidiary. It was not an independent guy who decided to sell cars. It was a Renault subsidiary. And at that time, if you wanted to get a car, you go to the dealership and you say, well, I would like to get a car. And at that time, the guy answers to you, you say, the car, oh my goodness. Let me double check. And young people, they don't remember, but okay. So, and then he's going to pick up the phone to call Direction de Zone, to call his colleague in Melun, to call the headquarters maybe, and after a couple of hours, he's back to you and he tells you you're very lucky. The lucky customer, because within 3 months, I'm supposed to receive 2 of them. One is blue, the other one is white. I already sold the blue, you're going to get the white. And you rush back home, you open a bottle of champagne to celebrate that you're lucky enough to get a car. Today, Fontainebleau is still having 20,000 people. How many car dealerships do they have for the same amount of people? If I didn't mistake, 13. 13 for the same amount of people. And look at the experiment we made. We took 4 average brands. By average, I mean cars you could have, I could have, etc. We took Peugeot, Renault, Volkswagen, and Fiat. We didn't take Rolls-Royce. And look, suppose you're in Fontainebleau by 9 a.m. For the 4 brands, it was possible to go, just to buy a car. It was possible to be back by lunchtime with the car, with the insurance number, with the credit, and it was possible for each brand to get in between 8 and 12% rebate on the price of the car. If you compare the two situations, it's a true revolution. So far, you don't understand why it's an organizational revolution, but it's a revolution. It means that during what we call the golden years, the French, they say les 30 glorieuses, what was scarce, what was missing was the product. Today, what is scarce, what is missing is the customer. Which means that during those golden years, in between 1945 and 1980, okay, so producers, suppliers were dominating their customers. Customers were not having any choice. It's funny to call this period les 30 glorieuses. It's just to tell you how customers can be a problem. Okay, so only in business schools, they tell you that customers are wonderful. And because I have young people in the room, let me make another comparison. Look at this device. Okay, don't worry about it. I'm not reading my mails. It's just because there is no clock here. Okay, so look, you know, I went to Paris. It was in 1967. Okay, I'm coming from another part of France. When I came to Paris, I wanted to get a phone because I started renting an apartment. Do you know how many times I needed to get a phone in Paris, say in 1967? 2 years. 2 years to get a phone. And after 1 year, they brought me the device, only the device, without a line, okay? And then after this, plus, my supplier was the French Ministry for Post and Telecommunication. Okay? Today, if you work with some of the suppliers here, they make the calculation. You know, they work on what they call the activation process, which means how long our teenagers are prepared to wait between the moment they buy the device, okay, and it works. Say they work on the process of 5 minutes. Okay, so you can understand. And plus, you're going to get your phone not from the French ministry, blah, blah, blah. You're going to get him from a provider. You can move to another one, etc., etc. Which means, I repeat, during those years, suppliers, I'm talking about suppliers because it is involving everything, were dominating their customers. And today, customers start to dominate their suppliers. The question is, how... As long as suppliers were dominating their customers, how did they use their power? What did they do with this power? You could tell me, well, they increase their prices, obviously. But it is not the most interesting part of the story. What I would like to tell you is, as long as suppliers were dominating their customers, those suppliers, whatever the business, they organized. And be back to the definition I gave initially, which means they decided the way people were supposed to work, only taking into account their own problems, only taking into account their own constraints. And they tell their customers, be prepared to face organizations that are much more dedicated to protect their members instead of helping their customers. Which means they build self-oriented organizations. By the way, there is nothing wrong, if I may say. I never faced this kind of situation of suppliers dominating their customers and nevertheless giving priority to those customers, okay? It never happened. Now, let me try to dig a little bit. What are the two most important problems any supplier is facing and he is going to give priority to as long as it is possible, which means as long as he is dominating his customers? First, any supplier is facing technical problems. To produce a good or a service, you have to do some task. You have some technical issues. And as a result of that, as long as it has been possible, we built organizations that were just representing the different tasks we were supposed to do to produce the good or the service. And to make it short, we built what I'm used to call segmented and sequential organizations. I guess you understand what it means, segmented and sequential. Segmented means people working in their silos, and sequential meaning everybody doing something after the previous one has done what he is supposed to do. Segmented and sequential. And guess what? Those segmented and sequential organizations are highly protective for people living in, okay? While protecting against what? In front of what? Which means that that's something which is very important to understand. The question at that time was how to protect our people, not how to help our customers. And people were protected first in front of customers, which means that as soon as you're working in a segmented and sequential organization, no one is responsible for the final result. You understand, you do your job, and if something is going wrong, not my fault. This is due to another part of the organization. You should ask these people, your file should be in this part of the... Let me give you an example, which is better than any explanation. When I was working in the US, at the very beginning, I was a little bit naive, which means that I was going to Indianapolis, I started connecting through Chicago, which is a huge mistake. Chicago is not an airport, it's a nightmare. And you know, if you take the last Air France going to Chicago on Sunday evening, and you want to get the last connection to Indianapolis, you have only 1 hour. And during this hour, you need to change to go to one terminal to another one. But mostly in between, you need to face these very customer-oriented people. I'm talking about the American immigration officers. And my pleasure, just after landing, was to go to one of the flight attendants and to say, do you think that I'm going to get my connection? And with a beautiful smile, this person used to tell me, our ground staff is here to help you, which means I don't care about your connection. As soon as you leave the plane, you're no longer my customer. You're going to get it, you're going to miss it. This is your problem, not my problem, okay? Which means that I'm very, very well protected. Okay, and again, okay, even if I'm not politically correct, I want everybody in this room to understand that your customer is a problem. Okay, so customer is not something which is beautiful, blue sky, etc., etc. As soon as you can be protected in front of your customers, you can relax a little bit more. But even better, in this kind of organization, you are protected in front of your colleagues, people you're working with. Because in this kind of segmented and sequential organization, you don't have to cooperate. Or to use the American word, you don't have to collaborate, but it's the same, okay? And I would like to tell you something, you guys, ladies and gentlemen in this room, cooperation is everything but natural. Cooperation is something which is difficult. Cooperation is demanding. It's painful. It's far easier not to cooperate than to cooperate. Let me tell you something. If in this room, some of you have difficulties to cooperate, don't worry about it. You're not suffering any special disease. You're just normal people, okay? You're just, okay, normal people. And I try to fight because sometimes when people have difficulties to cooperate, people surrounding them, they try to make them feeling guilty. Oh, you're not very open-minded. You're very narrow-minded, yeah. You don't like people you're working with. No. It's very difficult. And for a reason you can understand. If you have to collaborate with these people, with somebody, for example, if you and me, we have to collaborate, maybe you're going to depend on me, but I'm going to depend on you. And if there is something we hate in organizations, it is to depend on people. Try to think about the amount of time and energy you spend just trying to avoid any situation of dependency. It's a daily fight, which means that as long as it has been possible, we have been building this kind of organization. What is the problem? Unfortunately, after the old shock, markets started to open. It's a problem. Why? Because these highly segmented and sequential organizations, they are producing products or services of a low quality at a high price. And with the opening of the markets, companies had to face customers who say, now today, I would like to get more for less. I'm not prepared to accept to buy your product, whatever the defects. I'm not prepared to buy your product, whatever the price. Now I have the choice. You're going to propose something to me which is far better in terms of quality, and far less expensive. How is it possible to give our customers more for less? What are you going to use in order to match this kind of expectation, which sounds at the very beginning completely contradictory? You're going to use the organization. The organization is going to be the way to try to match these new expectations. And this is the reason why, step by step, starting in the early 80s, we started to move from these highly segmented and sequential organizations to very transversal organizations with highly cooperative organization. We move to project management, whatever you want, whatever the vocabulary you are using. And why did we do so? It is because cooperation is a way to improve quality while reducing the cost, which means to propose to your customers more for less, as customers would like to get. I could give you a funny example just for fun. I'm going to give you a funny example of that. You're going to understand why cooperation is a fantastic way to reduce the cost. You know, suppose tonight, when I'm going to be back home, I would like to watch some football, because as far as I know, there is the first game of the European Championship tonight. Am I right? Yes, okay, thank you very much. You know, well, it's fine, and I would like to watch this game. But you know, when it comes to watch this game, I have a problem, which is my wife. Because she hates football. She hates sport. You understand that I'm going to have to face a problem. Now, if you think about it, I have two ways to solve my problem. The first one is without any cooperation with Mrs. Dupuy. But if I don't want to have to cooperate with Mrs. Dupuy, what do I need? Merci, I love you. He said you need a second TV set, which means give me more financial resources and I don't have to face any confrontation. This is the reason why in companies, people are always asking for more resources, more resources, more resources, which is a way to avoid to have to cooperate with other people. And you know, if I have more resources, it's fine. I can buy a second TV set. I'm going to tell you something you love in companies. You know, with consensus. With Mrs. Dupuy, we have wonderful relationships. Okay, we have been married now for, I don't remember, by the way, okay, so but a lot of years, okay, never a discussion, never a dispute. Obviously, we even don't have to talk with each other. You understand, tonight when I'm back home, I can go to my study and watch the football game. She can remain in the family room and watch a very stupid American movie, okay? So there is no problem. We don't have to talk with each other, okay? Which means that here, there is no confrontation. The organization is not confrontational because we don't have to cooperate. It's much more peaceful. we can relax. But even if with Mrs. Dupuy we don't talk with each other, we're going to have a high degree of solidarity. And solidarity in front of whom? Sorry? In front of you guys. In front of the IAE. Why? Because look at something. What are you for me? You're my friends, by definition, blah, blah, blah. But I could say you're my customers. You're my customers. When, for example, Carolina, you came to me and you said, Francois, would you mind to come and to give a lecture for us? Suppose I tell you, okay, but it's going to be 10,000 euros. It's an example, okay? So I suppose, Carolina, you would say, Francois, even if we know each other, you would say, Francois, you're completely crazy. You became megalomaniac, okay? So, but I could tell you, hey, listen, I'm the only one to be able to deliver this kind of lecture, which means that it's my price. What does it mean if we stop smiling? It means that because I'm dominating my customers, I can externalize on my customer the cost of the well-being in my family organization. This is what we did as long as suppliers were dominating customers. They were externalizing on their customers the cost in terms of cost or in terms of quality of the lack of cooperation within the organization, of the peace within the organization. Now, suppose next year Carolina is coming back to me and she tells me, Francois, would you accept to give a second lecture for us? I would say, well, you know, for 10,000 euros, I can come every day if you want, okay? So, but suppose this time she tells me, Francois, stop, please, we love you, but today you're 20 people in the marketplace who are able to deliver exactly the same kind of presentation. Which means that this time it's no longer your price, it's my price. If so, she is becoming a normal customer. Because she tells me, Francois, you have to reduce your cost, and if you think about it, to reduce my cost, I have to manage my organization differently. I'm going to have to negotiate with Mrs. Dupuy what we do with the football and the stupid American movie. You understand? Which means that the family organization is going to become much more confrontational. You understand what I mean? Less peaceful. But it's a way to reduce the cost, because if we accept to negotiate and cooperate, we can work with a single TV set. You understand why we don't need to have two of them? Because the customer is no longer prepared to pay for the second one. I guess you understand my example. It's a true revolution. It's a true revolution because we're going to have to change the way we are working. But if we do so, which means that introducing cooperation, working in a way which is much more focused on collaboration, on transversal activity, etc., we are building an organization which is much more difficult to live in. You understand? Much less comfortable. This is a reason why business schools and consulting organizations, they put behind this evolution very positive word: cooperation, project management, transversality. It's so beautiful. Who could oppose to that? Nobody. But in fact, in reality, we build much more difficult organizations. If you think about it, this movement has been breaking the implicit deal that was existing between companies and their employees. This implicit deal during years and years have been, well, look, I'm going to, as being your company, I'm going to protect you. I'm not talking about protecting your job. I'm going to protect the way you work. I'm going to make you working in comfortable organizations. You don't have to be under pressure of the customer. You don't have to have any confrontation with your colleagues. And as long as I protect you, your part of the deal is going to be committed, to be motivated, to be dedicated, etc., etc. With this evolution I'm talking about, companies, they broke their part of the deal. What has been the reaction of employees? They broke their part of the deal. And they started to be less committed, less motivated, etc., etc. And we started to have these movements we are facing today, which is people withdrawing a little bit, people being less involved in their work, people being less committed. And I'm not talking about being less committed in terms of the time you spend working, but I'm talking about being less committed from an emotional standpoint, which means that people, step by step, bringing less from themselves in what they were doing and investing in other organizations, family, your community, whatever you want. And companies, they made this revolution, which has been the first one moving from segmented and sequential organizations towards much more transversal organizations. This is the first unavoidable change, but doing so, they created a situation in which people started to be less committed. And step by step, companies, they had to face this very difficult situation because the world is what it is. They were needed more commitment of their employees, and at the same time, their employees started to be less committed. How did they manage this situation? I'm going to be blunt about it. In order to manage this situation, companies, they use coercion, even if they hate this word. If you talk today with HR people, they say, well, don't worry about it, we put our people first. Not at all. Not at all, okay? I mean, it works in management like in politics. Wording is dedicated to compensate reality, if you understand what I mean, okay? So, and they use coercion. What does it mean, coercion? What have been the tools of coercion? I'm talking about three points. They started to develop processes, KPIs, and reporting systems, okay, which is what I call sometimes in French, because here I prefer the French wording, le trio infernal, okay, I guess, el trio del infierno, in Spanish, I would say, okay. So I repeat, processes, KPIs, performance indicators, and reporting systems. Now, I would like you to understand me. I'm not trying to tell you in no way that it's possible to work, to live in an organization without processes, without reporting systems, without KPIs. This is not what I'm trying to tell you. I'm just trying to tell you that as soon as companies starting to use those tools, they never stopped. Nobody has been able to get the movement under control, which means that today, for example, if you take an average company, nobody knows what are the processes. Nobody is having a general picture. If you look, for example, at the KPIs, nobody knows exactly how many KPIs somebody is having. You know, to give you an example, and you're going to see what I mean, a few days ago I was working for ExxonMobil, the American oil company. And one of the American top executives, he said, François, I guess you're right. I was telling the same story. He told me, you're perfectly right, and you know something, I would like to tell you something. I have 17 KPIs. I said, what's the problem? You mean you're lacking freedom, I said? Okay, if you want to get more freedom, you should ask for more KPIs. Because the more KPIs you have and the more contradictory they are with each other, which means that you're completely free to decide to match this one, to put this one aside, etc. It's the same for processes. I love processes. HR departments are the best in producing processes. Okay, so there is a process for everything, up to a point. As soon as somebody in an organization is raising a question, the next question is, oh, do we have a process for that? The answer is no, and immediately somebody is writing a process. Nobody cares afterwards about the process, but again, all those processes are becoming contradictory. By the way, my friends, it's exactly the same thing I told you at the beginning of this presentation. When I said, what does it mean working to rule? It means trying to use strictly all the rules and procedures you're supposed to use. It's the same for processes. If you multiply your processes, instead of having your organization under control, you lose control. You lose control because you don't know what people are really doing. You don't know what people are really using. And surprisingly enough, something today I observe in my studies, the more people are using control and the more they produce new processes and new KPIs. And what about the reporting systems? It's a beauty, the reporting systems. A few days ago, I was working for a French bank. I don't want to give the name. And I was talking with some executives having as a job just to write reports. Their only job is just to write reports. And we had a very good discussion talking about it. But after 1 hour and a half, one of them started to open a little bit and he said, you know what we do sometimes? In the middle of the report, we put a Google page or we put something from Victor Hugo. I found it a little bit childish. And I said, guys, I raised the most important question, which was, why Victor Hugo? And they told me, because it's the longest one. Okay, so, which means that when you start La Légende des siècles, okay, and I said, guys, you're a little bit childish. What is the reaction of your boss? They told me nobody is reacting, nobody is reading our reports. Okay, so that's it. And something which is very interesting is the fact that finally, think about something, all of you, with this temptation to try to organize everything. Because, you know, as you feel that your people are not completely motivated, as you feel that you need to get more for your people, you try to corner everybody within those processes and reporting systems, etc., etc. Somehow, you know what you do? You do what the public administration started to do 80 years ago. And if you do what the public administration did 80 years ago, you're going to get the same result. Okay? Would you say that the public administration is under control? No, not at all. Would you say that the public administration is efficient? Not at all. Would you say that the public administration is working at a low cost? Not at all. Which means that finally we are back to basic Taylorism, because Frederick Taylor has been the first one to explain if everything is clearly stated into rules and procedures, the organization is going to be under control. This is, I could phrase it this way. Today, management is making a very, very big jump, but it's a big jump back, okay, back to the beginning of the 20th century. Hopefully, some companies start understanding that they're going to face more and more trouble if they carry on doing what I have just described. And they start to think about the possibility to do differently, and this is the second unavoidable change. Let me share something with you. If you want to observe some innovation in terms of organization, you have still to go to the US. Because to speak the truth, everybody is focused on the emerging markets, because the future of markets is on those emerging markets. But if you want to focus on management, it's not in emerging markets that you're going to find innovation. I guess this is something you know. If you study any Indian company, for example, you're going to find a very basic bureaucracy. Okay, so, but this is not their problem. But if you want to find innovation, you go to the US and you observe some companies. Let me give some names. It's up to you just to drop some names, and then it's up to you to look at that. You can study companies like Cisco. You can look at companies like IBM. You look at companies like Accenture. And we could add some British company like Rolls-Royce. We could add, I don't know, maybe Barclays, which is a bank. If you observe what they try to introduce in their management, you have 3 points. And not all of them are using the 3 points, but if I try to gather everything, I can talk about 3 points. I won't have enough time to develop the 3 of them. The first one is to try to create community of interest among people that are supposed to cooperate. The second one is to move towards simplicity. And the last one is to reintroduce trust in the organization and in management. Let's try to say a few words about the three of them. What does it mean, a community of interest? Let me explain briefly. May I use 5 more minutes? Okay, let me explain why. You know, at the beginning, I told you that cooperation has been the way companies found to provide their customers with more for less. But this cooperation is even more mandatory today because, sorry not to develop, but as most of you know, I guess, customers today, less and less, they want to get products, and more, they want to get integrated solutions. I guess all of you, you're able to make the difference. Electricity is a product. Managing everything you do with electricity is a solution. Okay, so another example would be few weeks ago, I was working in Munich with BMW, and I brought some top executive of GTF Suez studying BMW and Siemens. And where they started to talk with BMW people, one of them raised a question, and he said, what do you think, how do you prepare the car of the future? And the guy said, we are not preparing the car of the future. We are working on the individual mobility in the city of the future. A car is a product. Mobility is a solution. Okay, just to show you the difference. But if you think in terms of solutions and integrated solutions, by the way, you have to build this solution for your customer. You're going to have to bring around the table people belonging to different parts of your organization, which means that here collaboration is crucial. But if you know a bit about business, what is making it very difficult is the fact that if I tell Mr. A, I need you for this customer, Mr. A is going to tell me, okay, but I want to get 30% of the contract. Mr. B is going to say, well, without me, you cannot do anything. I want to get 40% of your contract, etc. At the end of the day, I'm going to say, why am I bringing all those people? Because I have nothing left for me. Which means that here, our accounting systems are making collaboration difficult. This is the reason why today more and more companies are using something we knew for a long time, by the way, which is not something which is brand new, but which is renewed today. They use what they call multiple counting. Multiple counting means you're going to tell Mr. A, okay, you're going to get 100% of the contract for your bonus. You're going to get 100%. Everybody is getting 100%. If you do so, obviously you're going to have to make some shadow P&Ls. But by definition, you have to bring around the table as many people as possible because you increase the size of the case, which is benefiting to everybody. Instead, you're moving from confrontation to community of interest. It's just an example I wanted to give you. Second point, which is simplicity. Simplicity is the most difficult thing to do. Why? Let me take the example of processes. Because when you talk with people about the amount of processes they have, they tell you, you know what, I agree with you. We have far too many processes. But you know, when it comes to me, I'm just issuing a few of them. They are issued by the other parts of the organization. Even more, some people, if you're working in banking, in nuclear activities, etc., they're going to tell you those processes are mandatory because of the public authorities that are supervising what we are doing, which means they are not coming from inside, they are coming from outside. It's wrong. It's wrong. You know, in a pharmaceutical company, we made an experiment, I cannot give you the name, in which the amount of processes was so unbelievable that people were really suffering, up to the point there was some threat for some of them to go to suicide, which means the company was very, very anxious. We decided to take two very small departments, and we checked how many processes were created internally and how many processes were coming from their shareholders or the public authorities. In fact, the ratio was 85-15, which means that 85% of the processes were coming from the company. 15 of them were coming from the public authorities, the shareholder, etc., etc. which means that going back to simplicity means being able in each part of your organization to put everything on the table, to figure out what is useful, what is not, what is contradictory, what is overlapping, etc., etc. And if you do so, you can understand that you can build a much more simple, flexible, nimble organization. And the last point you find today where people are trying to do something is introducing more trust in management. Here, I would like to say something because I know that we are lucky enough to have in this room people who are not French. You know, or I could phrase it, we have in this room people who are not lucky enough to be French. It depends on you, okay? Find a way to phrase it. Trust is a very difficult question, because a characteristic of the French society is a lack of trust. The French, they never trust people. If in France somebody tells you, trust me, your first question is, what is he hiding to me? Okay, so, which is, for example, the opposite if you compare with the American society, which is a trustful society in the US. There is a lot of trust. The question is now, not to love each other, but to have a reasonable level of trust, which is making it possible for people to work together without having to write stupid processes for that. And the basic condition to introduce trust is to have rules of the game. This notion, let me just quote something. I don't know if some of you remember this wonderful paper on the fair process, which has been published in the Harvard Business Review some years ago, written by two professors from INSEAD. I don't remember the name, I'm sorry, okay? In which they explain what it means, rules of the game. We are not talking about written rules. We are talking about the fact that people working with each other, they know implicitly or explicitly what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in the group of people they are working with. Let me give you an example in the family life. If you take the husband, the wife, and two kids, between the husband and the wife, I guess the two people, they know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for the other part. And they know what is going to be the sanction if one of them is betraying the basic agreement. As well as the kids, they know what is acceptable for their parents and what is not acceptable for their parents. And they know what is going to be the sanction. This is what is making the family life possible. But does it mean that everybody is sticking on the door of the apartment, the process of the family life? Nobody is doing so. Everybody knows what is possible, but you don't have to write it. It's an implicit agreement which is defining the possibility. In fact, if you do so, what do? You reduce the uncertainty of behaviors. You understand what I mean? It's impossible to collaborate with somebody having a complete uncertainty of behavior. And guess what? You know what? Accepting to reduce the uncertainty of your behavior, this is, what philosophers call ethics. Ethics doesn't mean to be honest. Ethics means, to be ethical means you accept to be reasonably predictable in order to make it possible for your colleagues to work with you. It's far more efficient than processes. It's very difficult, but those rules of the game, they have to be elaborated by people themselves. They are not coming from the top, but if you try to do so, you obtain far better results in terms of having your organization under control instead of just using coercion. This is the second change we are moving to in some companies, that they realized that it was no longer possible to keep working only with processes and reporting systems and so on.